This morning we'll have a panel discussion on the topic LGBTQ 2021, looking back, looking forward. And our panelists will be Dwight Panozzo, Marcey Buchakjian, and Diane Scarangella. And I will call upon them individually to introduce themselves, and then I'll open with a question for everyone. Dwight, you want to go ahead first, please?
Sure, David. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see everybody out in Pride Month. I've been a member of the Society for, I think, 7 or 8 years. You know, that all gets lost in the mists of time. I'm a gay dad. I'm a therapist in private practice. I volunteer with Gays Against Guns. I run the Friday meditation group, and I'm running for the AEU National Board this summer. So, but you know, the competition is pretty high level. I don't know if I'll make it, and it is a competitive race this year. So I'm glad to be here and glad to share some about my life during today's presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Dwight. You'll get my vote of course I don't vote for it. Yeah, I don't think anyway. Diane Scarangella, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Diane Scarangella. I'm the first generation Italian American lesbian. I've lived in Bergen County for over 59 years. And I think that's important for when you hear my story later to know, because it puts me in a position of being a privileged member of the LGBTQ plus community. As a white person, if I'm not too butch, I don't tell somebody I'm a lesbian, I can pass, no one will know I'm gay. And even today, there are times when that's a choice I still make, to not let people know. But everything that I say today is through that lens. So recognizing the privilege I do have, but also, having grown up as the daughter of first generation immigrants, a Catholic, there are a lot of influences that shape the story. From a personal perspective, I have a master's degree from NYU in counseling ed, and another one from Columbia in adult education. I worked for over 35 years for Bergen County Technical Schools and Special Services, running programs for displaced homemakers, single parents, women on welfare, and then that transitioned into grant writing, which expanded a lot of the programming that I did. But I still find my heart in the displaced homemaker programs. I'm currently the president of Northern New Jersey Now, past president of the Displaced Homemaker Networks, Inc. Executive board, which is, and that's a 501c3, that's statewide. And I'm co-chair of the North Jersey Sierra Group, and many of you might have seen me as a part of the Resistance Cafe, which took place for many years, and we hope to bring back again sometime in the fall, whenever you all open up and can give us some space. That cafe is geared to activists like everyone here who need some respite and want to just chat with someone who has similar sensibilities to themselves and can feel open in doing so. I'm currently working with Anthony. Thank you for being here, Anthony, at the Bergen County LGBTQ Alliance. So thank you so much for asking me to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I have to tell you, my wife, Susan, who gave the membership announcement, works at Bergen County Special Services, the school, and our daughter, who's on this call, also Rachel, is a proud graduate of the Paramus campus of the technical school in Paramus. So you have friends here from that. Marcey Buchakjian, would you please unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Marcey. I am an art teacher, elementary school art teacher. And in New Hampshire, I serve 500 kids across 4 buildings on a cart, actually several carts this year. I'm also a gay mom, single mom, divorced and dating. and live in the seacoast of New Hampshire, close to the mountains, the ocean. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Marcy. You know, your introductory comments for all three of you actually raised themselves many questions. Now, there are public and private issues that everyone faces, and LGBTQ individuals face unique issues. So I'd like to ask you individually what you do see as the biggest external issues facing you or your friends, and what are the personal issues that you and your friends commonly wrestle with. And I realize your opening statements touched on some of these issues. And Marcy, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So in terms of external, I think that it's good to know that I began teaching in New Jersey with Janet Glass at Dwight Englewood School, and was in independent schools for 16 years between Dwight Englewood and then at Moses Brown School in Providence, which was a Friends Education, is a Quaker school, where being so in terms of visibility in my career, it's been very interesting. At Dwight, it was very much at the time a don't ask, don't tell position. And then at Moses Brown, it was very much out and proud, very equality minded, very social justice minded campus. And then I moved to New Hampshire, and the city that I'm in Rochester, is very much a kind of a, New Hampshire is a very purple state right now. And I'm in a town that is, you know, there are Trump 2024 signs flying right around the corner from my home. And that being said, it's a city that does have a lot of work to do with progressiveness. So in terms of visibility, I for example, I ordered a pride flag that's on its way, and I'm a little nervous about hanging it on my house. I'm not completely out to my students here, but if they ask me, I tell them. So internally, externally, I think the nice thing about New Hampshire is that the politics have been, in terms of equal rights, being able to have gender pronouns change on licenses, for example, nationwide, the healthcare issues of being able to have equality with healthcare for partnered gay and lesbian people and trans people is good. And we've got a lot of trans rights that are on the horizon as we speak. In fact, my childcare helper is non-binary and has been doing a lot of work at the state level in Concord on equality for trans people, trans youth, trans adults, and trans visibility. So I feel like that externally is really the next wave of where the state is headed.
Okay, thank you very much. And in your answer, you raised many issues that we're going to come back to. Diane, would you take that question first about public and private issues that you face, the most important ones to you?
Well, I know, this question came up, Janet shared some of the questions that were going to be asked. And so I thought about this a lot. And I kept going back to childhood and things that, were, because I realized that being in Bergen County, this is a kind of very liberal environment as compared to what Marcy just described. I mean, I'm less afraid of putting a flag out in being abused by that. Although, on the other hand, I'm always surprised when there is some type of abuse, or when I actually find myself not responding to somebody when they say something like, "Oh, you and your sister." I have a partner for 40 years. We've been together. The other day I donated something to someone, and she, "Oh, you and your sister," and I didn't correct her. And so that kind of told me that over the years I've internalized so many social mores that said there's something wrong. You don't open up to people. You don't tell them, that you're a lesbian. You don't admit to being gay. And that to me then said, well, I guess I internalized a lot more negative stuff about being gay than I ever thought I had, especially having, again, grown up in, fairly liberal environment. So I think that's an issue. It's kind of like, if I liken it to feminism, internally, I think that we we think we've come so far in many ways, and we've got this marriage equality. We have all, we see we are a marketable demographic right now. I mean, so we're out there. More positive images are in the media than there ever have been. There's less caricatures out there, but at the same time, have we really come that far? I mean, Anthony and I were talking about this the other day. What were there, 17 or 18 anti-LGBTQ plus legislations in New Jersey? I mean, we're aware. Are we even aware of that? I mean, so how far have we really come? I mean, that's the scary part for me. What I've internalized, what other people have internalized about what being gay means, that there's an image that it's changed so much, but really has it? I remember when I was a kid, I used to watch, I don't know if how many, some of you may be in my generation of the 60s and 70s, maybe, but at the afternoon after school at 4:30, there were always these old movies on Channel 9 or 11, the Greer Garson and Claudette Colbert. And I remember watching all those old movies, and Michael's going, yeah, I remember watching all those old movies. And, as a kid, my daydreams were, romantic love, and I'm going to grow up and have children and all these children. And it never occurred to me that the person I was always daydreaming about was a woman. It just, for some reason, it didn't connect in my head. I never really thought about it as meaning anything. But, when I think about it now, I think about how pervasive gender stereotyping was and how willing I was to not kind of connect with my own self. So I think that for me, the internal issue is that no matter, how far we think we've come, I have a big fear that we haven't come as far as we think. And especially in Bergen County, because I feel like we're I hear what Marcey said, and I feel like we're in some kind of a cocoon. So
Yeah, we're going to come back to that. That's a really good, very pregnant issue. Dwight, would you take your hand at that question about the public and private issues that you face now?
So I'll start with the public ones because they're far more important. We've come miles and miles and miles on the L and the G rights. Bi-erasure is a problem in the world, but I think they'll get a hold of it. It's the T.
Would you explain that term?
Oh, bi-erasure?
Yeah.
That's when everybody loves to see things in black and whites, in dichotomous thinking, because it's less energy intensive. It's just a product of the human mind. Sorry to get too psychological on a Sunday morning. But that's just the way it is. And so because of that, it's so much easier to see people as straight or gay or, lesbian. And so a lot of people don't want to take on that bisexual moniker. And there's been lots of bullying, especially in the gay male community over the years, against men who identify as bi. Oh, no, you're not bi, you're gay, and you just won't admit it. No, I was socializing last night with a dear friend, hanging out in the hot tub for an hour or two. The dude is bi. Let me tell you, I heard the stories. I've heard them for years. He loves men. He loves women. That's who he is. But I think the L, the G, and the B will all be fine. It's the hatred directed to members of the transgender community that really needs our greatest focus at this point. The hateful laws that conservatives, Republicans have turned against transgender people, particularly transgender kids, right? In athletics, it's utterly unconscionable. But 150 years ago, we had slavery, and it was run by people with a certain genetic background. And it's my strong suspicion that if we did enough genealogical studying and genetic studying, we would see that their great grandchildren are the ones who are focused the most intently on hating trans kids. It's just a human nature problem. So that's the outside world. My world, so I'm a divorced gay dad. I've been divorced for about 4 years now, but my ex is actually on this call. I saw him on screen, on the second screen of people joining us today. He's a dear friend of mine. He's a wonderful co-parent for our son who just graduated college like 3 weeks ago yesterday. But we found after many years and probably tens of thousands of dollars of counseling together that we weren't really a good fit. So we're great friends, but that leaves me as a single gay guy in his late 50s. Well, that's a tragedy in the making if you want a partner, to be quite honest. Because quite frankly, the older we get, the less good fresh stuff is left on the shelf. It's a sad fact of life.
We'll quote you on that.
Huh?
We'll quote you on that.
And you know, when people find something good in their lives, they do everything they can to hold on to it, right? I was just texting, direct messaging through an app earlier today with a charming man, very handsome, very independent, appears to be very smart, lives up in Poughkeepsie. He voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020, and he's trying to explain to me why he's right. And I'm just like,
This was a gay man?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, you know,
it's like, I'm the wrong person for you, dude.
yeah. You know, I want to come back to that, but first, I'd like to ask you, and I'd like to start with you, Dwight, about generational differences. So, you know, all of you and most of the people on this call are middle-aged, and not just middle-aged, but, you know, in the older
Thanks, David.
quadrant
Thanks,
of that.
David.
Well, I'm older than you, so it's okay. You're just a young whippersnapper to me, Dwight. So, and you may have a unique perspective on this, Dwight, because I know you're a psychotherapist. I don't know who you treat, whether you treat young people or not, but do you notice any generational issues? Do young people have the same issues that you do now or that you did growing up? I'm talking about LGBTQ.
Yeah. No, it's so very different. People like me, but I got to be honest, the people in the generation before me really did so much work on trying to advance equality, trying to advance rights for LGBT people. They were the ones that got beaten. I'll tell you though, my ex and I have had beer bottles thrown at us, well, once, eggs thrown at us once. And we weren't even holding hands, but we were clearly identified. We were clearly attempted assaults were made. And have I been called all kinds of things growing up? Of course I was. Did I live in terror of being identified as gay? Of course I did. Of course I did. Did that lead partially to my becoming a therapist? There's no doubt about it. Yeah, they have their own challenges, and I dare not speak for what those challenges are, but they're not the same. The magnitude is so different. Yeah.
Marcey, what do you think? Now you're a teacher. You mentioned earlier that you're not publicly out, but neither are you in the closet, and if asked, you tell them.
Yes.
So do you have a sense of what younger gay transgender people are going through and how it may differ from what you went through?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. My district has had at least 3 or 4 children come out as non-binary or trans as young as 4th and 5th grade in the last few years, and the administration has handled it very well. It starts off with a conversation with parents and then a stand-up meeting with the faculty saying, this is the new name of choice, the new pronouns of choice beginning tomorrow. Please tell your classroom and and this is the bathroom, that's the safe space, and go from there. I've been really excited to see that. And I used to sing in a lesbian chorus here in the Seacoast called Women Singing Out, where it was very intergenerational. And after every concert, we would go out and have drinks at Margaritas and celebrate the concert. It was fascinating to hear, just even in the distance between, say, being in your 60s, your 50s, your 40s, your 30s, what our experiences were, what our rituals for commitment ceremonies had been, what kind of legal rights we've had. And what became very clear is that so much has changed so rapidly. Right now, I'm actually dating a younger woman who is in her late 20s, and it's been really fascinating to hear that she was out at 15 and that she had safe space in her high school, and that she was able to, experience things at a much younger age in terms of identity, pride parades, being able to find her tribe of support, having support systems in place in her schools.
Where did she grow up?
She grew up in Connecticut. Connecticut, and she also went to a public high school that was for the arts, which was very progressive as well. So I think it does depend on the region, of where you live. And if you look at social media, things like TikTok right now, and find the LGBTQ community there's so much more information and sharing of stories around non-binary and gender fluidness, as well as the trans community. I learned the new phrase NB, spelled ENBY, it's the abbreviation for the phonetic for non-binary, or NB, which was brand new to me as of this month. So there's I think there's an explosion of information happening in the queer community about gender fluidity, and looking at cross-cultural references between Native ancestry and the kind of honoring folks that were identified as two-spirit or queer. I think that, again, though, it does really depend on the region of where you're living, how much you're exposed to this. But the access to the internet has really been a game changer for a lot of youth. I've met many folks who are trans, who are in their 30s, who said, Facebook saved my life. I could find my people. I could find out that I was not alone, that there are other people like me. And because of social media, I found safe space when I wasn't safe at my home or in my community. So I think that as problematic as social media can be, in terms of like students having access to bullying each other off campus, for example, there's also some positives that come with that too, and some empowerment as well.
That is a very good point. And as you say, there's a lot of problems with social media, but I've always been struck when I would see documentaries about the gay liberation, and they would talk to middle-aged or older people, and they would say, until I came to San Francisco or New York or some other big city, I thought I was alone. And it had not occurred to me until you just now said that social media really has the power to change that. Yeah. Diane, would you talk about generational differences, and especially in the context of the issue that you raised earlier about who you're questioning whether the changes that we've seen have sticking power?
Well, I think it's interesting what Marcey said, because I think you're right. There are for young people, there are, especially just gay young people, there are more organizations that are out there. There are gay student alliances in schools that give them as long as you're hooked up to mainstream society in some way, there are some outlets. And as long as you're, like what Dwight had said, as long as you kind of fit within the gay lesbian mold and you aren't too outrageous, there are outlets, and there are places where you can go to be accepted. On the other hand, I think when youth step out of that, and step away from those places, there isn't the same level of acceptance, and that's why we see, you know, in 2020 and 2021, the largest numbers of trans women of color being killed and experiencing violence. That, you know, society may have gotten more used to our more socially acceptable image. Again, we are a marketing demographic. So society has gotten more used to accepting that. But at the same token, that doesn't mean it's gotten more used to accepting all of the other things. And I think even within the gay community, when you start talking about our alphabet soup at this point, you could go from LGBTQ plus to God knows how many other initials follow that. At one point, I looked at that and there were like, you could have added on like 20 letters and it just kept going. I mean, non-binary, it's no longer, it's not gender preference anymore. Now it's gender identity. That is very frightening to mainstream society, I think. The idea that someone could say my biological identity is not my identity. It's, you know, when you think of about the more conservative religious dynamic, that's even worse than just who you love. I mean, we spent years in the gay community saying it was about love. And, you know, now we're adding all of these other things, which are really important because they're part of being human. It's just that society is not really great at accepting any kind of divergency. And I'll say this right now. I mean, you think about, I grew up, you know, at a time period, I was in the New York City in the early 80s at GRID. Which was, you know, AIDS before it was AIDS, and it was the gay men's disease. And, you know, until Ryan White got it, you know, when he saved the gay, he saved us to some extent. Because now then, you know, I mean, I experienced young people dying, people hiding their HIV status. And we thought, okay, so, you know, we've got to a place now where AIDS is not a killer anymore. People shouldn't be experiencing that stigma. But yet not that long ago, I don't know if you remember Billy Porter from Kinky Boots and Pose on TV, coming out by saying he's HIV positive and feeling relieved at the ability to do so. It took how many years for him? And we're just talking HIV positive now. We're not, you know, we're not talking about, you know, someone saying I'm transgender or trying to go to somebody, a doctor, and saying, you know, I need medical assistance and the kind of treatment they may or may not receive from that doctor.
Diane, when you talk to younger people, do they share your younger gay people, transgender people? Do they share your, what I'll call your pessimism about this?
I don't know. I don't think it's pessimism. I think all of these things can be changed. So I'm not saying they're negative. What I'm feeling is a caution. I think that these are things we need to act on. So, and I think they do, because I don't think they see it as pessimism either. I think that it's things that we need to take action on. But I think it's hard enough for every individual youth has their own issues with coming out and the way they accept themselves. And a lot of that has to do with how their parents treat them and how their friends treat them, not just finding a society out there that they can, you know, connect with, but it's also the people around them connecting to them. And that's the part where I think there still needs to be more work. I think we need to get beyond the images and the labels and the cis, bi, LTX, transgender, transsexual, cross-dressing, non-conforming, non-binary. It's all very, you know, we have to get beyond those labels to being people who are people and accepting a person for who they are. And in a society where somebody like Billy Porter, who's very well known, is afraid of even coming out as HIV positive, you know, we tend to forget. I mean, in Bergen County, we have the largest percentage of homeless youth in Bergen County are gay. I mean, when you start to look at senior, and Dwight, you mentioned it, you know, we're senior citizens. Where do gay senior citizens go? Where do gay victims of, or trans, when I say gay, I'm going to encompass the whole rainbow of gay, okay? From non-binary, transgender, everybody. Where does a gay person who's been raped go? Who's a victim of domestic violence go? who's a substance abuser, who's coming back from re-entry from prison, who's, you know, a gay youth coming out, who is someone undergoing transition and needing medical assistance. Where do those people go in Bergen County? I had a friend about a year ago who asked me, who had just moved to Bergen County, and said, where is the community? Where is the gay community? I mean, where can I go to connect? And I said, what gay community? I mean, we don't have a gay community in Bergen County. We do have lots of gay people in Bergen County, but there is no community you're going to find easily, especially as an adult. You might find it more easily as a youth, only because you got Rainbow Cafe and New Jersey Buddies, and you know, so there are some outlets to it. But that's why I was so excited when the Bergen County LGBTQ plus coalition and alliance and Anthony started talking about, let's create a community center, a holistic community center for LGBTQ plus in Bergen County, because you know, when you're looking for legal assistance, you're looking for medical assistance, and if you want to find somebody who's gay, who you know will accept you for who you are, you don't have to, you know, hide it. I think we need a place that people can go that's recognized, that's the place. And it's ironic because here we are in Bergen County, 900,000 people in a, you know, near 6 miles from New York City, and yet we have no sense of LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, I have a couple of other questions for everyone, and then I would like to open it up for questions from the audience. And the one thing I would like to ask all of you is about some fissures in the LGBTQ community. And the first one is about this issue of the Gay Pride March and the police. Now, not all of you may be familiar with this, and Marcey, who does not live around here, may not know. So let me just describe it for a moment. So there's a Gay Pride March in New York City. And I think in prior years, there's been a gay police contingent who have marched in uniform. And this year, they've been denied their ability to march in uniform. And the reason is because of the incredibly negative and contentious history with the New York City Police Department and the gay community. So I'd like to ask all of you your opinions of that. And we may be putting Marcey on the spot. I don't know if she's familiar with this issue. But I'd like to start with Dwight on that. So what do you think? And if you're uncomfortable, you know, voicing an opinion.
Oh, no.
I didn't think you would be.
Dave, you know me, I could go on for quite a while about this one. And I also want to make a shout out to Janet Glass and other people in social action who have helped guide me to where I have gotten to, which is just a point along a journey when it comes to understanding issues around race. I want to tell you, I think the core issue around the cops and the parade is about race. It's about the idea that Black lives do matter, that people of color have been victimized and marginalized by white folks, and I'm one of them by default, it looks like, for centuries. And let's be perfectly clear, there is no such thing as a blue life. Black lives matter, but there's no such thing as a blue life. There are people who became cops, right? You don't have to stay a cop if you don't want to. And if you aren't willing to deal with other human beings in a respectful way, even when they're doing the wrong thing sometimes, you have to put the humanity of that person first. If you can't do that, I don't want you to be a cop. I just don't. And I don't want you to march in a parade with a gun, because you end up traumatizing people who, as a group, have been treated horribly by people who look just like you wearing that blue uniform.
So you don't think that gay cops should be able to march in uniform?
No, absolutely not. They can wear their gay officers Action League shirts and they can march in a group, but absolutely not. Maybe we will get to a place in 10, 20, 30 years where whatever eventually replaces the way we do policing now, we will look forward to having them march in a pride parade. But we are like light years away from that right now.
Okay. Marcey, now you may, I don't know if you were familiar with this issue before I brought it up. So if you're not comfortable talking about it, that's fine, just say so. But do you know about this issue and do you have an opinion on it?
I hadn't heard this specific one. And in terms of opinion, I can say that I have seen that contingent marching in Pride, and I know that it does make sense that to be out of uniform might feel safer and more respectful given the context of Black Lives Matter. Here in Rochester, we do have a Pride celebration, and we haven't had it during the pandemic, but the last one that we did have, we're a small city of 30,000, and we did have officers that not only were in uniform marching, but they had rainbows on their uniforms that Velcroed onto them, huge, and people cheered. So it was, again, I think the context of being in a small town changes that dynamic a little bit, but not a lot.
That's interesting. So they marched, did they march as a group?
They were actually helping to kind of monitor the parade. It's a very small town, and so the main street just had a police presence, and the officers were showing their support by having giant rainbow pride
that's interesting.
banners
That's different.
on
So they weren't marching. But
no, they were. It was, the parade was very small. It was more booths actually, and people going to see what organizations were around for support and live bands.
I like that they were. You know, there's always a police presence at these things, right? So I like that they had that rainbow stickers or whatever.
David,
Diane,
could I interject something quickly?
Of course.
I think the cops in Marcey's town have hit upon a step along the path. Let's have all those cops wearing not just rainbow armbands, but something for Black Lives Matter. Let's have them leading a Black Lives Matter banner and carrying BLM flags. That might change people's opinion on letting them march in uniform. I don't know.
That's a very good point. Diane, I'm sure you have an opinion on this issue.
I have an opinion on everything. So
I was confident
you know,
you'd have one.
2 years ago, I mean, Dwight came to this. We had Leonia, the town I'm in, had its first flag raising, and the person that actually went out and bought the flag and hoisted it up was the chief of police in our town.
What town was that?
Leonia.
Leonia.
So I had very mixed feelings about this, the issue of the police marching. I don't think they should be marching under the banner of the New York City police force. But I do think that gay LGBTQ plus police have struggled for years to be accepted in the police force, to be able to be out in the police force. They fought that fight, and those who want to march should be able to do so as proud LGBTQ plus people.
In uniform?
Not in uniform, because I think the uniform, but I think that they should be able to march with some type of an association or something that says, LGBTQ plus police officer association, so that people understand they're officers, and that because they struggled, and their struggle is a gay struggle, and they should be, they should be proud of that struggle too. I mean, and again, it's a hard call, because when you look at things intersectionally, everything that Dwight said about Black Lives Matter and racism is very, very true. And as an organization or association, the police force has a long way to go to overcome the systemic racism that's guiding it to some extent, but that shouldn't diminish the struggle of gay officers who have fought to be able to be out, and we should be just as proud of those officers for taking on the struggle and standing up and being visible. So I'm torn.
Okay. I'd like to invite anyone who's got a question to raise their hand in Zoom. I don't mean physically raise your hand, because we won't see you, but to raise your hand in Zoom. And Pam Berglund, I see your hand is up. If you would unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much. Am I better now? Or still out? Okay,
Still,
well,
go ahead,
let
just go
me
ahead,
ask
yeah.
this question, and it's been something on my mind for a long time. And either three of you can answer or anybody who wants. Is being gay, physical or psychological? That's my number one question. And number two, why does it make a difference what we do in our homes, in our private lives? We don't go out and ask somebody that we know, do you have sex in your house with each other, with another female or a male? We don't ask those questions. So why should it have an impact on something that's so personal have to do with what happens in a person's home versus the fact that they're gay or straight or lesbian or whatever? Can you answer that for me?
Is that direct? That's not directed to anyone in particular, right?
Well, I can give
Yeah,
you the
go ahead.
psychological answer
Go ahead,
for that,
Dwight.
Pamela. So when we attempt to control other people's behavior, sometimes we're trying to not be victims of crimes they might perpetrate against us or other human beings. But in terms of a victimless crime, like, well, it's not a crime to love someone of the same sex, but they try to make it a crime because they don't want to look at those impulses within themselves. So if they make them absolutely unbearable to all of humanity to engage in those things, then they can keep them further away from their own consciousness because they're scared of them. That's why we use the term homophobia, right? Fear of same-sex attraction. I think that's the reason for that. And as to the issue of, is it physical or psychological, you can't separate those two. It's both. It's a yes and yes all the time. Yeah, that's my opinion on it. Others may see it all differently.
If the other panelists would like to pipe up on that or not?
Well, for me, it's a simple, it's the idea that, I've been together with my partner for 40 years and, there's certain places like in New York where I'll go where we can be walking and holding hands. And that's become something that I feel freer doing and we feel freer doing now than we have ever done before, but than I would have years ago. But I mean, I think that just being able to do that, I mean, why should that be limited to only people who are acceptable to society because they're straight? Straight people can walk down the street holding hands. They can put their arms around one another. They can even kiss in public, and that's acceptable behavior. But for years it was not acceptable behavior for gay people. It's becoming more so now, but for years it was not. And even to the fact that if you guys remember a couple of years, was it last year or the year before, probably the year before when the prom came out on Broadway, and they at the very end, and they showed it at the Thanksgiving Day parade. They showed one scene from it, and the very end of the scene was the two main female characters kissing, and there was backlash about that because children might be watching, and I mean literally that was in the news. Children might be watching, so. That's why I think it is important for me, for instance, to know that we're in a world where we can be more open and be more accepted. It's not so much that we want to share our personal sex life, but it's you should be able to be like anybody else. Hold hands, show who you love.
Okay.
That's all.
Marcey, I don't know if you want to add your voice to this or.
Sure. I think that sort of piggybacking on that and noticing what Janet has written too, I think that anything that challenges people's comfort zones in the straight community can be perceived as a threat, just as in, kind of looking at all of the isms of ageism, racism, classism, sexism, homophobia, that the discomfort is coming from not understanding each other, not hearing each other's stories. I think that Janet's point about religion being a piece of that puzzle, part of my story is that I was married to a queer clergy woman in the UCC church, and that was a really interesting eye-opener, especially moving to a town that is mostly conservative. She was the first woman pastor they'd ever had, let alone queer, and there was backlash when we moved into town. There was a video made, posted online, saying that she was an apostate, and named us by name and encouraged people to protest the church and call and storm the castle. When we put a rainbow flag out front, it was ripped down, and people sent flags from all over the country, and we covered the entire chapel with 75 flags in an act of protest. So I think that looking at, the Pope's statement just in the last couple months about saying, I can still not abide by gay people, here in 2021 was such a huge emotional blow for me personally, because I grew up similar to Diane, Italian, very Catholic, and am no longer Catholic, but I think that religious organizations are a piece of that Western society and sort of a lot of religious traditions have something to say about this because of the institution of marriage being sacred in many denominations. So I think that for me personally, the more that I see religious leaders and organizations like Ethical Culture stepping up and creating this space for conversation, the more that we see safe spaces for our youth who are coming out anywhere on that spectrum, the more that we have an understanding that sexuality is a spectrum. It's not necessarily locked in one place for people, and that there's a continuum there. It gets more empowering the more literature we have for all ages that involve queer culture, the more media, looking at sort of what's available on Netflix today. You can find gay couples, you can find trans actors acting in trans roles. You can see the L word, you can see more information, more creating more safety in pop culture as well as in our communities. I think that's a positive thing.
Okay. Alan Berger, would you unmute yourself and give us your question, please?
First of all, thanks for this incredible discussion, which makes me realize always how wonderful the whole Ethical Culture Society and movement is. And I have a question kind of related to transgender issues. As many people here know, I run a nursery school. And over the last 2 years, we've had 2 trans children, one a girl who was identifying as a boy, and then a boy who was identifying as a girl. I also hired a teacher who identified as non-binary. And then recently, a friend of ours invited my wife over for an evening to hang out, and she had invited a trans friend of hers, a trans woman. So what I've noticed about myself, and I don't know if this is my own problem or it's more generic, is that I've really struggled with the pronouns throughout this whole time. And it was most evident when we were together, my wife and I, and these other 2 folks, one of who was trans, and I kept referring to her as he or him. And finally, I was so frustrated by it, I brought it up right there and I said, listen, I just have to mention this. I'm really, been struggling with this. And basically what he said to me is, you have to give up the patriarchy. And I said, I feel like I've done that. I've really, so Dwight, I don't know, is this my own psychological issue or is this a more generic thing? And I don't really know if there's an answer.
Oh boy, pronouns.
But it's something I really am struggling with.
So pronouns are an utter minefield.
By the way, I too struggle with it, Alan.
I actually want to, and people can tar and feather me if they want to. The children who self-identified in nursery school as being of a different gender than their biological sex of birth, I think there's something categorically different than someone who, out of the mists of their self-expression, determine sometime in their teen years or their 20s that they're non-binary or that they're trans. It's just a guess. And here's the worst part of my guess. I fear we won't really understand this for another 20 years. That's my own little guess, and of course I could be wrong, but I too, I get tired of the issue around pronouns. I'm guilty of just wishing that we could go with a he, she, they. I can get that. I agree to something other than he, she. Okay, I'll do it. I'll if I'm wrong, I'll ask to be corrected. But the concept that I get to customize my pronouns, so not only do you need to remember my name, but now you have to remember my customized pronoun that nobody else in the universe has. I'm sorry. None of us is that wonderful. I'm not that wonderful, and I don't think you are either. I'll just put it out on a limb. I'm guilty as if anyone wants to charge me on that.
Let me ask you a question. Is the answer to this problem as simple as another version of Ms., MS? You know, prior to the invention of that word, which occurred within all of our lifetimes.
I don't know, and I think there's a whole movement against the Ms. moniker, so I don't want to step on that one.
I didn't know there's a movement against it.
I have heard something in a podcast against it, and I cannot remember what it was.
You know, let me bring up a related issue to this. Alan, I'm sorry.
No, I'm
Okay.
just
I
wondering.
want to bring a related issue up. You know, I spoke before about wanting to bring up some fissures in the gay, trans, queer community. And one of them has been over transgender issues. And in the past year or so, I was very surprised to learn that the Stonewall riot was actually a riot of trans people. But that was mainly a trans club, not a gay club. I only found this out from a documentary I saw about a woman named Mama Gloria, who was now in her 70s or 80s, and she really blazed the trail for trans people. And I know that there's a feeling, I learned also that there's a feeling in the trans community that their contribution to gay, trans, queer, lesbian rights has been ignored. So, and this keys off of your question, Alan, about the pronouns. And I just want to bring it up and see if there are any, you know, the other panelists have any comments on that. I realize this is a bit of a minefield, but why not? So Marcey or Diane, do you want to address that? Or Dwight, you're welcome to also.
I can try. I think I haven't heard so much about the pronouncing, but in terms of trans visibility here in New Hampshire, it has increased recently. And the queer community, I think, has received it very positively overall. In my experience, granted, I'm working with mostly children and educators, so I might not have the whole story, but I think that right now in the United States, we have more trans visibility in politics than ever before. In this last election, we've got folks in positions of power helping to make progressive decisions about equality that encompasses the trans community. So I think the more visibility, the better. In terms of pronouns, the only addition I have to what Dwight said, I wasn't aware of the controversy of people coming up with customized ones that are unique to them. Here in New Hampshire, I've heard mostly our caregiver was they, them. And my sons and I really worked hard, and we'd slip up sometimes, but they were fantastic about it. And it was really good for us as a family to have a really positive experience with a very patient and caring caregiver who was like, that's okay if you get it wrong sometimes. That's all right. I'm non-binary, and this is my name of choice, my pronoun of choice, and the fact that you're making an effort really matters. So, and in terms of gender neutral nomikers, like instead of Mr., Ms., and Mrs. and Miss, yeah. I've heard MX has started to be kind of toyed around with it. It's pronounced
X is an X-ray?
MX, it's pronounced mix. That's very new to me. I just heard that this month in terms of teachers. Like I think, again, TikTok is the place where I'm finding these things, which is kind of the not completely younger generation. There's a lot of, but there's quite a bit.
It's pretty much, that's a generational media.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I've been kind of looking at that space in terms of looking at LGBTQ progressiveness to see what people are talking about. It's an interesting resource for what's behind me coming up, like what's coming down the pike.
Right.
It's evolving, I would say.
Jim Norman, you have a question? Please unmute yourself.
Yes. Yes, I have a recollection, an observation, and a question. A number of years ago, maybe 10 years ago or so, there was an incident in Montana. This has to do with generalized hate, not anti-gay hate or anti-LGBTQ hate or anything like that. There was an incident in Montana around the time of Hanukkah where a Jewish family who had displayed a menorah in their window. Their window was smashed by a rock. It was clearly a bias reaction. It was a hate crime. And the reaction of other townspeople in that area who were not Jewish was to put menorahs in their windows and to basically surround the hatred with love. And I'm wondering if it would be useful if people who did not identify as part of the LGBTQ rainbow would, as a gesture of surrounding the hatred with love, this goes to Marcey's trepidation about flying such a flag in a small town in New Hampshire. If those of us who weren't part of that community decided to fly that pride flag and just told everybody, this is who we all are. Would that be useful or would that be offensive? That's the question on that. And the other thing is that this is also a recollection. When I was a small kid, I was in the Boy Scouts, and there came a time when we were asked to ask our fathers if they would become assistant scoutmasters. There was a need for that. So I very happily brought the application home to my father, who started filling it out, and he came to a question, race. What race are you? And he wrote down human. And I think that we really all need to remember the words of that great philosopher, Rodney King, who said as he was being beaten up, can't we all just get along? And this whole question of identifications, he, she, whatever, all this, to me, it almost doesn't matter. And to box us all off into separate little communities who may or may not be at each other's throats, it just seems to me if we all identify as human, or if you have to, Hugh person or Hugh woman, but part of the human species, it just seems to me it would be a great advance. So straighten me out or wake me up if you think it needs to be.
I think that part of the issue with pronouns are that a pronoun is acknowledging the person's identity. And so it's not, I think that from a perspective of an individual recognizing that the person who may be transgender woman is a woman, and you're referring to her as her because that's her identity for her. It's a respect to the person. Unfortunately, it's become also it's also gotten into the realm of labeling, which is divisive, and that's the problem. I mean, on the one hand, you have a respect for human being. On the other hand, you have a label that does do a divide. And the way I look at it in terms of the pronouns issue, because I see that as connected, is that a large number of organizations want to become, or society wants to become, politically correct. So there's a trend to push pronouns all over the place. So every time you sign on someplace, you put your particular pronoun on your sign on in Zoom, and that's a push that we're getting all the time. And I see that in the Sierra Club a lot. And I find that when you look at large organizations trying to be politically correct, that's when those labels really become the most divisive. When it's on an individual basis and it's acknowledging somebody's identity and who they are, it's not. That's my way of looking at it.
I'd like to ask a related question, not of our panelists, but of Janet Glass. Janet is a language teacher, and as most people know, other languages, in particular Spanish, genderize, I don't know if that's a word, genderize all kinds of things that we don't in English. Now, I don't know if you can answer this question, Janet, but to what I would imagine in other languages, this is an even bigger controversy.
Yeah.
Can you address that?
Yeah, a little bit. My Latino friends kind of laugh at what's become the politically correct term for Latinos, the Latinx. So you avoid saying Latino or Latina. And most of my Latino friends, they just brush that off. But I would like to involve Anthony Torres in this discussion, because I bet he has an opinion on the matter.
Okay, and that's apropos because he's next on the question list. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hey, thank you. I think I have a few things. So when we're talking about like pronouns, to the gentleman that first brought that up, I think it's just a matter of retraining your brain, and it's something that you don't do on a regular basis. So it's just natural to stumble with it. And it's just a matter of like, when people start doing it, it's fine. But in a broader sense, when people are talking about LGBT and pronouns and all this kind of stuff, I think it really boils down to institutionalized homophobia, where we're talking about the issue is visibility or recognition, and we are talking about people who are saying, I'm different from the norm. I'm different from everyone else. And it started out with like gay men, because initially it was just gay men. Everyone was just gay, right? Then you have lesbians saying, no, I don't fit in that category. I'm different from that. So you have gay men and lesbians, and then transgenders and all this kind of stuff. And each time it's met with, you're supposed to be part of the norm. And I think in the whole, when we're talking about LGBT people, it's that the whole thing is saying that, we're different, we're individuals, right? So I think trying to think it from that perspective, you start to be more accepting to people and whoever it is. And by saying my pronouns, you're trying to say, this is how I'm different. This is how I identify. And it's more of an acceptance thing. One other thing I wanted to, and I'll be quiet, is
that's right.
Is that when you're talking about, I know in this room and in this realm, when people are talking about like, well, what you do in your bedroom, why does that matter? And it's mean in a more of accepting way that you're saying that it's like everyone should have their own privacy and stuff like that. But I just caution people to think that that's the argument that Bergen County has put forth to the LGBT people in a negative way. So when they sit there and they say, oh, it doesn't matter what you do in your bedroom, we're all the same. That's not true. You look at LGBT people and across the board, it's double or triple when you're talking about sexual violence, you're talking about domestic abuse, homelessness, addiction. Across the board, we're doing a lot more. And the county's response is like, well, that's separate what you do in your bedroom. Everything, we're just gonna deal with homelessness, or we're just gonna deal with domestic abuse. But there's nothing provided for them that is different. We're not taking into account that this is, a population. We're talking about like 50,000 people that are identifying as LGBT, and we don't have anything in place in structure for these people that is different from them. So I just want to say it does matter what you do in your bedroom, and it does matter when you talk to a therapist. The therapist here, I'm sure is great, but a lot of therapists, they're like, it doesn't matter your sexuality, but when talking about my individual experience, it does matter, and I want to talk about it. And there's a lot of people that don't want to hear that. So I'm just giving the other side of that argument.
And to bounce off of that, what Anthony said, I mean, you know, if you're a gay person and you're seeking assistance, one of the key things you want to do is be able to open up to whoever you're seeking assistance from, be it medical, physical, mental, you know, emotional, you know, legal. And, you know, every time you go into an office somewhere to talk to a person, to get assistance, you need to feel comfortable being able to talk about who you are. Even you know, I go to a gynecologist and they start to ask, when was the last time you have, you know, sexual intercourse? And it's kind of like, well, you know, do I open up to this person? I mean, if I don't know this gynecologist, this is the first time I've been there, do I open up? How do I know this person's going to be accepting of me? And that's still true to today. Even with all of this, there's still, you know, maybe we don't get overt, we may not get overt prejudice coming at us, but there still is a lot of stigma, and there still is a lot of fear. And I think that's why, you know, there are kids when they're marginalized, kids who may not have come up out of as accepting a home environment, or may have grown up in a strictly religious environment that does not condone homosexuality. When they come out, they have no place to go. And that's why we have so many homeless youth that are gay. And we still have that. So, I mean, that's why, you know, Anthony and Nick, when they proposed this community center, that's why it was so important that I think we do something like that. So there is you know, something that's identified as a safety zone. And I know one of the parts of the center that they're talking about has to do with bringing in clergy from all the different denominations who would be there to talk to youth and adults who have a religious background and want a safe zone with a clergy person in their own, in whatever religion they identify with, so that they can even come to terms with themselves, and not just, and also the way society is treating them.
Allison Goldstein, sorry. Allison Goldstein, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Good morning. I had a handful of thoughts, and I apologize if they're not all interrelated, but they are relevant. One is, I don't know if anybody else listens to Michael Signorelli. He does an afternoon talk show. And yesterday they had a replay of it, and he featured the first transgender person in the Biden administration who, her last name is Levine. She's Dr. Levine. I forget her first name. And she was talking about the pride of which she had, pun intended, I should say, of becoming the first trans person in a high level position in the government. And I don't know if that's a sign of things to come, but I was just so unbelievably moved by that. The second thing is, for the life of me, I do not understand the American obsession with bathrooms. I don't know if anybody has any insight on that, but every time the issue of LGBTQ comes up, somehow bathrooms become part of this conversation. And to me, they are solely utilitarian. I don't understand the obsession with that. The next thing I wanted to say is I've watched a series about a transgender girl. Her name is Jazz Jennings. And I had no knowledge about transgender whatsoever, not good, bad, or otherwise. And I found it to be one of the most enlightening things I've ever watched. It takes you through her journey, having been born biologically male and then transitioning to being female. And I've watched the episodes over and over again, both because I find her captivating and also just to educate myself, because it certainly is not something I've ever received any education about anywhere. Then my last comment is, as a 63-year-old straight woman looking back on my life, in terms of phobia, mockery, those kind of things, it's never been from anybody in the gay community. It's typically been straight men. Nothing against them. I love a straight man. I'm married to one. my experience of harassment has been from straight men. The classic walking past a construction site when I worked in New York, I don't think those were gay people that were mocking. And I endured that morning after morning for 13 years that I worked in Manhattan. That's what I wanted to share.
Any comments? No? Okay, thank you. I want to say we have 3 hands that are raised, and I think we will have time for all 3, but only those 3. So if anyone else has a question, you're welcome to stick around till after the close of the platform when we will open it up, and you can talk about it then, but we'll limit it now to the 3 hands that are raised. And I hope we'll have time for all of them. And the first of those 3 is Linda Bennett. Linda, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, it's sort of an expression of my frustration with this. This has been a terrific platform. The alphabet soup, this goes to what Diane was talking about. The alphabet soup of people trying to define themselves by narrower and narrower slices to the point where you're going to get somebody like me who is inherently sympathetic and supportive of the rights of people to express whatever gender they are, whatever their preferences are, whatever, as long as it's not exploitative of somebody else. What's the difference with some of these things? I don't understand some of them. I mean, they're coming up. They're more initials than I know what to do with. I don't know what they mean. I'm just finding it difficult to handle. So why does a queer person say, I'm queer? What does that mean? I can figure out, lesbian, gay, transgender, but you get into the non-binary. What does it mean? What's the difference between that and bisexual? I don't know. So if you can help me with this, I like it, and then the pronoun issue is an issue, I think. I'm glad we brought it up. Okay.
And any takers?
I'd be happy to. That's a big question, Linda. I think for me personally, queer is the umbrella term that encompasses the alphabet soup for me. And it also was a word similar to other derogatory words that are used to disempower a group that's been reclaimed over time and become empowering for me. If I said that to someone who is in an older generation, I've been with people who say, "Oh, you're using that word. It's unkind to say that about yourself." For me, I find it that it's powerful and positive now for me. And
The word queer, you mean?
Queer, that's sort of the umbrella that encompasses
Yeah.
all of these different identities. Non-binary, I can answer for you. So binary, male and female, those 2 dichotomies, and non-binary means that you don't identify as one or the other, that you could be both and, or depending on, or gender fluid. There are some great websites that have definitions for a lot of these terms. I think that's a bigger conversation, but I think, let's see. There was more to your question I wanted to answer. I think that we're realizing that, that gender identity and gender expression and sexuality, these are actually not all the same things. They're different categories of an identity. So for example, I have friends who identify as trans men and they also identify as gay men. So their gender expression and their gender identity, they identify as gay, and they were born biologically female, transitioned to male, and found each other and got married. So there's different layers of identity within these categories. It's pretty amazing when you start to realize the possibilities, and I can see that it can be overwhelming, but there are great resources out there that can help to kind of parse some of this out a little bit.
looked earlier at the style manual for the National Association of LGBTQ Journalists on this question of the use of the term queer, as well as some other terms. And here's what they wrote. Originally a pejorative term for gay, now reclaimed by some LGBTQ people. Use with caution. Still extremely offensive when used as an epithet, and still offensive to many LGBTQ people, regardless of intent. And of course, the Q is in the name. But you know, I know there are other contexts in which some oppressed groups have attempted to reclaim words that have traditionally been used as epithets or used in a negative way. And this is one of those examples, but it's a very interesting question. Elaine or Dan, or both, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you. I actually wanted to read a comment that our friend Mitchell, who had to leave early, left me in the chat. He's very involved in his college alumni association and suggests this as a potential point of action for anyone who might be able to. So he writes, comment on how viewers here can help the younger folks, especially trans. One is for LGBTQ attendees. Reach out to your alma maters and offer hope, as I have done, provide mentoring, career advice, etc. If other attendees wish to help, think about how, if you run or know of organizations that will have internships and that will, and welcoming atmospheres, let the college LGBTQ organization know about it so that their students can apply. Also join or support organizations in state, local, and the federal level as well.
Okay, thank you. Eric Sandhusen, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, thank you. And thanks to our panelists. This has been informative and really lively, and I appreciate that you've all shown up as your genuine selves. I'm lucky. I work for a big company. In fact, it's the 5th largest employer in New York State and the largest health system. And they are very affirmative in making sure that all of the members of its workforce are respected and able to be their full selves. And this goes a little bit onto what something, Diane, that you said about how gay and lesbian is now a marketable demographic. So while I acknowledge that some of what my employer's activities are is to do well by doing good, that is to say, you know, they know that it makes sense to serve this community in healthcare. They know it makes sense to support employees who are LGBTQ or a whole variety of different intersections, as it were. I guess I'm just curious as to if you have any thoughts about, if you will, not just the commercialization of our differences, but also how they're finding it to be good policy and good business internally as well as externally.
If you look at the economics of, and this is a generalization I'm going to make, okay, because it doesn't, obviously it's not going to affect every single gay male or gay female, but if you look at the economic demographics, I mean, gay men tend to have higher income levels and more funds to disperse than any other segment of the gay community, including lesbians. And I think that that's also true because we live in a patriarchy. So it made sense initially when they first started to identify marketing that they do some marketing that really targeted where the money was. And that's what's being driven by. But if you'll also notice, there's not a lot of marketing out there focused on any other aspects of the gay community other than lesbians and gay men. There's no marketing that goes out there around the trans community, you know. So I think, you know, what's become acceptable, and again, capitalism helped to make that happen. What's become acceptable is that demographic, but we still, you know, we still don't see the same level of acceptance for any other aspect of the gay community. And I think this identity thing, I think what Linda said, really, you know, it's very confusing for people It's confusing for me to some extent. I remember what Dwight said earlier about, bisexual men. I think that's true with bisexuals and in general. I mean, the gay community, when I was younger, felt that bisexual was a cop-out. And they actually was taking away from the gay community. And it was somebody who didn't want to admit they were gay because of social stigma, so they were identified as bisexual. Or we could love anyone equally, which actually is probably true for people, and it's probably the way we should all be. Love the person, not the image. But I think as a species, we have a long way to go to get there. So I know that was kind of a roundabout answer, but thank you for bringing that up the way you did, Eric. I think, again, look at how we objectify women as a part of advertising. So anything becomes, something capitalism can make money of. But I'm glad you're looking for a company that sees benefit in it. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
I remember when Stolichnaya started that advertising campaign that was clearly targeted towards gay people. And I've since read that was a very conscious decision they made, because they did that exact analysis that you mentioned about disposable income and who has it. And they found that demographic that had been unaddressed. Well, we are out of time for this panel. This was a terrific panel. I'd like to thank all three of you. This was really wonderful, and I very much appreciate your giving up your Sunday morning to talk with us. And I would like us to give a special thank you to Janet Glass, who actually put this together. She made it very easy for me. Janet did all the heavy lifting on this. And I'd like to thank everyone who attended this morning, especially any non-members who came. If you'd like to get more information about us, our Zoom master, Ken Karp, will play a short 30-second video telling you how to do that. To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.